Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you an early access review of Synergy. It's a striking ecological sci-fi city builder being developed by Leaker Studio and published by Goblin Seed Publishing. A couple things out of the way before I begin though. First, I got this key from the publishers, so thank you. But this of course does not influence my thoughts on the game. And the other thing is, I'm treating this as an early access review instead of a first impressions video, because I did put way more time into the game than what I thought I would, so I feel like I could adequately give my thoughts. However, I didn't play through all the breadth of the content with the free play maps and the other scenario in the campaign, so treat this as a first impressions if you'd like. Okay, and without further ado, let's get to it. So I'm sure most people will have their attention immediately captured by the unique hand-drawn style, inspired heavily by the works of the French artist Mobius. It's such a distinct style with its own personality and immediately captivating look. Although, to be honest, at first glance, I wasn't really a fan of it. I will admit though that the more time I spent with the game, the more I really started appreciating this style. The animations for the people and buildings were really well done as well, although I would have liked to have seen more. In many ways it seemed like the city didn't really simulate people living, but more of worker bees carrying out tasks. I wish that the people had other idle animations than just wandering around, or that they interacted with some of the place decorations like the benches or sun awnings, or stopped to chat with one another. I hope more animations are added in future updates. Also, while I'm at it, I'd like to be able to zoom in just a bit further so I could appreciate the animations just a bit more. Another cool touch that I'm used to in games like this is being able to hear more ambient noises, especially when you zoom in closer to the city. Much of the game felt largely silent other than the background music. I think other sound effects for various buildings and people would go a long way to helping this city builder feel more like you're building a city. So in Synergy, there is a story, but it was a bit difficult for me to parse out. What I gathered is that there are disjointed groups of people living on this planet, all trying to survive in its harsh and sometimes dangerous environments. And apparently, they don't really know anything about the planet they live on. This makes for a neat game mechanic that I'll mention in a bit, but really didn't make sense to me from a story standpoint. Were they groups of people living underground and now only reaching the surface? People are trying to colonize the planet? Or maybe even people who crash landed on the planet and are now trying to survive? Pretty sure I just named off 3 other games. Supposedly, the tutorial suggests the people were from an oasis that ran out of resources. This might work, but I'd imagine everything in the oasis would have to be so biologically different to know nothing about the outside world. However, in the campaign, it says that the group in that story are researchers, which sounds even worse that they know nothing about their planet. Like I mentioned, there is another scenario in the campaign that I didn't play because each one takes a good number of hours, so there might be more stories revealed that paint a better picture. And I imagine the team plans on adding more, which I hope so because I think some of the writing for their events you encounter in the world map were interesting. The gameplay of Synergy is fairly standard for a city builder. You need to build houses for your people and make sure they have basic necessities for survival. The game presents the world as being a difficult place to survive in. However, in gameplay terms, it's pretty easy to provide them with their needs. This is in part because the people only need water and simple food. Once you have a production chain set up for both of these, then the people will work largely uninterrupted. There are 4 other stats that housing tracks, being knowledge, social, well-being, and culture, collectively called housing satisfaction. Yet none of these actually provide any benefits to your people from what I could tell. The housing satisfaction score of each house is aggregated into a total score that is then added to your prosperity score, which is only for bragging rights and trying to personal best. The only reason why I needed to try and maintain some of the statistics or build certain buildings was because the scenario I was playing demanded it for an objective. Otherwise, I think all of these buildings can be safely ignored if you don't care about getting a high score. This was a huge problem for me as I felt all the different stats, the housing satisfaction, prosperity, and district scores were all pointless and did nothing for the overall gameplay loop. Coming back to the game's overall difficulty, I found this to be incredibly easy for the most part. Nothing in the game really pushed my village. Once I had steady logistics for various resources, nothing was ever an issue. I didn't have any random events that threw me for a loop, or sudden lack of resources because of needing to spend them for some crisis. The only thing that I had issues with for a bit was a stint of heat exhaustion in a particularly long run of dry seasons. Although this was because I couldn't figure out how to cool them down until I planted a tree, because apparently sun awnings don't help. Actually, there were a lot of little things like that where the game didn't really explain things very well, such as being able to plant various flora with the use of seeds. I had no seeds for most of the playthrough because I had no idea how to get them. Eventually I realized it was from a tech called seed scattering, which I had ignored for the longest time because that didn't sound like something that would give me seeds, but more like something where I needed to spend seeds I didn't have. I think the most challenging thing was making sure you had enough people for all the roles you needed to fill. It becomes too easy to try and maximize a building's efficiency by stocking it with workers, only to not have enough people to transport goods around. I found myself monitoring this worker placement closely for much of my game by reducing the number of workers in a building or removing them completely if I didn't need their production. One thing that I found odd was that people don't have any specializations, so one second they could be researchers, and then the next they could be miners. Maybe that's RimWorld experience showing, and it honestly wasn't that big of a deal, just something that I noticed. Synergy does offer two mechanics that kind of set it apart from other city builders, which include their district system and the analysis and proliferation of the planet's flora. Starting with the simpler of the two systems, the districts offer up something nice for the players to try and plan their cities around. Each district is denoted with a town square, which can only be one of three: market, botanical, and cultural, and within each there are 3 specializations. They have their own district radiuses that could vary in size, and the district score benefits from specific buildings related to the specialization. Although, while each specialization provides a bonus, it's not affected at all by the score the district has, as in, the bonus isn't any better or worse depending on the district score. Despite this, I like the idea for the system, but I didn't care for the implementation. As it stands currently, the game doesn't tell you which square provides which specialization, their associated bonus, or the radius that each specialized district might have. Especially with the last thing, I feel this makes it really hard to do any planning. Not to mention, if there is overlap with the districts, then one district might eat more out of the other than what you anticipated. Luckily, you do get all your resources back from a building when you destroy it. However, I feel districts get introduced a bit later than what they should, and I didn't really see it as practical to tear down every building just to rebuild it around my square. Furthermore, most of the time the districts seemed pointless unless I had a scenario objective necessitating a certain type of district. And finally, that brings us to probably the most defining aspect of Synergy, beside the art style, and that is the analysis of plants and how the player can affect the environment to help or hinder certain floral species. When you first start a game of Synergy, your people don't know how to interact with the plants around them. You can rip them out and get a bit of resource gain, but that will destroy the plant. Or worse, it could result in your citizen getting hurt because the plant was poisonous or thorny. So every city needs to have a field research tent to analyze the local flora. This information can give your colonists, and the player, the necessary knowledge on how to interact with plants and what resources they might gain. As you develop new ways to interact with the plants, such as pruning or notching them, you could reanalyze them for pertaining information. In addition, you can unlock new ways of analysis that can give information on what conditions these plants might grow in. This information can tell you what humidity levels they need, mineral levels, or even if they have some sort of symbiotic relationship with another type of plant. This sounds all great on paper, but I found that after I did the analysis, my researcher was never really doing anything. Other than for the knowledge buff, which again is pointless besides the score, I was at a loss as to why I would want so many of these hanging around, or would even want more than one with more than one researcher staffing it. I really like this concept of being able to affect the environment and modifying how the plants grew, although in the game's current iteration and my own experience with it, I felt it was never really necessary. I barely interacted with this system at all besides the initial analysis, and never found I needed to modify the environment because I was getting all the resources I needed. However, I could easily see this change as the game introduces more types of plants and other types of maps, and quite honestly, this might be the case with some of the maps already in the game. And that brings us to the value and my final thoughts. But first, if you're enjoying the review or found it helpful, then please consider giving it a like as that helps me out greatly with the YouTube algorithm gods. Synergy runs at $24.99 USD in early access, and I put just under 14 hours with it, which covered the 1-hour tutorial and the first scenario mission. There's a ton more time I could put into this game with the other scenario mission that I expect will take me the same amount of time, and the 3 different sandbox maps. However, right now, I just felt that this city builder was a fairly standard affair that actually felt kind of boring at times. It has some cool ideas though, and I do think that with a bit more love from the developers, they could easily turn this into something enjoyable. Recently, they put out a roadmap that covers their upcoming updates, and it seems like they have a lot planned. New buildings, decorations, and updates to bonuses and prosperity, which I hope means tying them into the actual game loop. And those are my thoughts on Synergy. If you played the game, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. And if you haven't, then let me know if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, or if you have any other questions. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.